Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Palace podcast, brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network. Today we have a crossover episode with the Brentford team. So we've got Dan from the Brentford team coming all the way down to have a little chat with me. You all right?
All good, yeah. I'll be there at the weekend, so looking forward to it.
You'll be going down to Cellar, so you can't be all that far away.
Yeah, it's not the best end actually. It's one of the worst away ends in the league, I have to say. I mean, if you're not the tallest person, so I'm quite tall, so I'm okay. But if you're not the tallest person, it's a struggle to see there.
Yeah, well, sorry, I can't really do much about that. But as I forgot to mention, I'm the host today, Dan Tanner. So as of it's the crossover, we're going to have a little bit of a chat on how we perceive the season so far. A little thing of how Brentford's going, a little bit of how Palace has been going, and our sort of thoughts on the season so far. And then maybe sort of have a look at the previous game, as this is the first reverse crossover. So now it's the reverse fixtures are coming in, so now we've got to have a bit of history repeating itself, or are the tides going to change? And then lastly, we'll give kind of like score predictions and maybe some players that are going to make an impact in the game for both sides. So to start off, Daniel, how do you think, what's your views and thoughts on the Brentford season so far? Because I was preparing for this, I was kind of having a look at your fixtures over the last couple of months, and they have been, well, dire, really. You've had Man United, Liverpool, and Arsenal in the space of a month, and had the unlucky misfortune of being the giant killed in the FA Cup fixture the other week. So it can't have been fun the last month or so to be reporting, doing a podcast, really.
No, well, in terms of the league season, it's been okay. I think you've got to say it's pretty good. I think survival every season is the first objective for a team like Brentford, and we're much more comfortable than we were this time last season, where we were looking over our shoulder a little bit. So in terms of that, it's gone okay. Of course, there are teams like Bournemouth, Fulham, Forest who are exceeding expectations, so we're not quite on that level. But yeah, it's been fine. We've scored a lot of goals this season. Our home games in particular have been very entertaining. The likes of Brian and Boomer and Johan Wisser both have scored over 10 goals this season. Mikael Damsgaard has been brilliant in terms of his assist numbers. I think early in the season, we started with a lot of more favourable home games. So obviously we played Palace on the opening day, but then we played the likes of Southampton, Ipswich, Wolves, Leicester all at home. So we got the results that we needed to in those games. Our away games to begin with were much more difficult. We played the likes of Liverpool, City, United away by contrast. So we didn't do so well on the road. I think the biggest frustration I've had this season is what you mentioned at the end there, us losing in the cup competitions. So even in the Carabao Cup, we managed to get all the way to the quarterfinal. We played against Newcastle, who we had beaten in the league about 9 days earlier. And we made 5 or 6 changes, taking out the core of our team, and we lost. And again, against Plymouth, you can't underestimate these teams. If you take out 5 or 6 of your top players, there's always a risk that you end up on the kind of result that we were. So that's my biggest frustration, given that we are 11th or 12th in the Premier League. Why haven't we prioritised perhaps those competitions and going on a cup run? Because I think the only other real goal now for the rest of this season, now we're out of the cups, is to try and sneak into those European places. But I think that's very much a long shot given where we are currently.
Yeah, I think very much Palace isn't much different. We started off poorly, and now it's trying to slowly move up the table, and we've been doing sort of really well recently. We've I think it's 7 unbeaten in a row, including, I'm sorry, I got to bring this up, the cup competition. We went through. We got the and yeah, we had a sort of slightly better when it comes to the cup competitions as well. We got to I think it's also the quarterfinals, but then we had to play Arsenal twice in 5 days and kind of conceded 9 goals. So we got kind of mullered there, which wasn't fun either, especially when I had to talk to the the Arsenal guys 2 or 3 times in a very, very quick succession. But yeah, I think it's very much in the same window at the moment. It's trying to get that mid-table and trying to just secure any kind of position we can. And at the moment, also in the January transfer window, just trying to keep some of our players. Like we've got some England internationals that everybody seems to be sniffing around, which seems to be kind of a bit more of a problem. But
likewise in terms of Brentford, I think transfers, I think the likes of Brian and Bumo, I think he'll be off in the summer. I think at the moment we're very much trying to keep hold of the likes of him and Wissa. But there's always teams sniffing around. It looks like we're getting a new right back in who will sign tonight or tomorrow. So there's a chance he may play against Palace, but I suspect it might come a bit soon.
Yeah, I was looking at that, and I think it's sort of in the neck. I think he's now going down to confirm the transfer, so it might be confirmed in the next couple of hours from when this
medical tonight, I think. Yeah, so medical on Wednesday evening. So it will likely be confirmed on Thursday.
Yeah, because we had our major transfer of Essie. I'm going to do that a lot. They have a very, very literally was confirmed just before the West Ham game. So he's sitting in the stands watching his new team. So we're still looking for essentially left backs because we're getting kind of poached. Tyreek Mitchell seems to be the one on everybody's list at the moment, which is kind of annoying. So very much the same way. But in the terms of Palace's season, we started off absolutely abysmally, not winning until mid-October, and then having to beat Spurs on a very, very sort of grindy out 1-0 performance, and then it slowly started to get better. We got away with our nasty pre-Christmas period of Man City and Chelsea and all that very, very close together and beating Brighton too. So, which is always good. You've got to beat the derby, guys. So any kind of would say aspirations or anything for the season? Do you think you can make it to Europe, or is it going to be a bit more of a realism of trying to just get 10th or 11th and just trying to stay there? Or do we really think you can push on to the next level, essentially?
I don't think we'll make it. I think it's a long shot, but there's always a chance, I guess, until there's not. I think the team have very much got to aim for those positions because you want something tangible to aim for, and coming 9th or 10th, it doesn't get you much reward apart from a few extra million for the next season. So I suppose it has to be the aim for anyone in and around Brentford and Palace, because I think both of us are far too above the relegation zone now in terms of points, given that the bottom three aren't picking up points very fast. I think we'll be okay this season. So the next aim is to look up and try and do that. I think in order for us to do that, we need to probably just get more results against the top teams. I think we've done quite well this season at beating the teams that perhaps on paper that we are slightly better than, or even the home games against teams that are considered more our equal. I think this one will be a very tough one, given the run you're on. And I think, you're a team who are probably quite similar to us in terms of quality and level. So I think this will be quite a well-matched game and a difficult one, given the circumstances and the run you guys are on.
Yeah, I'm expecting it to be sort of, because we're kind of like fire and ice. We are very, very similar teams. I think I said this when we first started the podcast, that I thought Brentford was going to be one of those ones where we are almost identical. We've got some good players on either side, but most of them are kind of at the same level. So it's going to, very, very minute things are going to change, or some really weird refereeing decisions. We've also got to kind of slightly worry about your great habit of scoring in the first couple of minutes of games, which is a thing from this season of as soon as you sit down, they've already scored. So
yeah, it's very much died down recently. We've not done that recently, but yeah, it happened, I think, 3 or 4 games in a row at one point earlier this season, including away at City and away at Tottenham. So you never know, it's possible. We've also done it a couple of times after the opposition score, and it's not noticed as much when that happens because the goal will end up being on, the 60th minute or something. But we have done it once or twice after the opposition have scored as well. So the best advice I can give you, don't score a goal and then we won't do it to you.
Don't score. Just Leave it as a 0-0 and we'll all be happy. Is there anything you want to ask me before we move on to the next section?
No, obviously, I was just going to ask what you think is behind the recent upturn. Obviously, is it the fact that you took a little while to get used to perhaps losing Elise, who obviously went in the summer? And again, are your aspirations, I would assume they're very similar to what I said about Brentford.
Yeah, our aspirations are very much at the moment. I think if you asked me this at the beginning of the season, it would have been just to survive, get out of the relegation zone, because we were absolutely appalling. We were just kind of, we weren't getting like beaten, but we were losing very silly 1-0 games and things like that. It was unforced errors. But now that we've gotten onto a nice bit of form, we've started to take points off, much like you guys, the big teams, and we slowly started to get points off of teams that we should be getting points off. So like the relegation guys. So very much in the same vein. Aspiration-wise, I would love to get Europe, but at the moment, I don't think we have the squad or the investment to do anything like that. If we can get sort of into the top 10, it would be greatly appreciated, because Palace's highest, I think, position is like, I think, 11th ever in the Premiership. So if we can get into that top 10, it will show that there is some kind of life at Palace. There is some kind of a potential there that only maybe one or two extra players or world-class players even to try and just push us that little bit further. That's very much the same vein as you are, that it's a mid-table team that it's going to take quite a bit of investment to push into the next bit. With that, I think we'll take a quick break to hear from our lovely provider here at Zencaster that allows us to talk about nonsense in football for half an hour or so on a daily basis.
Do you have a story that the world needs to hear? Have you struggled with reaching new audiences who are engaged with your story? Well, it might be time for you to start a podcast. Let me tell you about a platform we use here at Global Sports Podcast Network. Zencaster makes it easy to start a high-quality podcast built for growth from day one. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes the ums, as, you knows, and 22 other speech patterns, Zencaster makes it super easy to start a podcast that sounds great. Ready to tell your story? Well, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencaster.
And we are back with the Daily Palace podcast with the crossover with Brentford. So as it is the reverse fixture from the first ever Daily Palace and Brentford crossover, let's go and have a quick reminder and relive the first game, which was essentially the first game of the season. So, which was a 2-1 victory for Brentford, which had its moments of just, bit of lunacy, really. I remember it very fondly of Eze being denied essentially a world-class free kick from something like the 30, 40 yard sort of yards out, and Hughes being a stupid boy and pushing over somebody in that same play for no reason whatsoever, and then getting essentially that shot taken away. And I think there was also one or two like very weird refereeing decisions, but that may be just my Palace bias. What do you kind of remember of that first game?
Well, it was our first win against Palace. I think over the years since we got promoted, we kept drawing for a very long time until the end of last season when we went to Selhurst Park and Crystal Palace won. So at the start of this season, we were looking into it thinking, okay, Palace are a team that there were very few teams by that point that we hadn't beaten at some point. I think it was Palace, Leicester and Newcastle, the three we hadn't beaten in the Premier League era. And that got us off on the right foot. We beat them and we went on to beat Leicester and Newcastle this season. So we've now not played there's nobody that we've played in the Premier League we haven't beaten at some point. So that's probably my overriding memory of it. Of course, it was a long time ago in terms of the game. And obviously, it was another game where both Wissa and Mbumo got on the score sheet together, which happens quite regularly for Brentford. And they've been such a great source of goals for us this season, especially since Ivan Toney's left and Wissa's gone down the middle. So yeah, it was a good way to start the season. I think another statistic. I don't think Brentford have lost on the opening day of a Premier League season yet, so it was good to continue that record as well. We've never ended a weekend in the relegation zone, so I think our strong starts usually help towards that.
Yeah, it's very very much. You can't really underestimate Brentford. They've always been, since you've come into the Premiership. You've really sort of staked your claim as, we're not going to be pushovers. We're going to come, because I seem to remember the first game. I think first game at the stadium was a 0-0 with Arsenal straight off the bat of being promoted.
We won. We won. It was.
Did you win?
It was 2-1 or 3-1.
Yeah, I see. I thought it was 0-0. So, sort of that the new stadium, and you get Arsenal straight off the to christen it, and yeah, you go and actually give them a game. So, and this was when Arsenal were really in the ascendancy, not quite what they are now, but very much that, not quite the title contender, but almost. So, which is always
I think it helps. I think when you come up as a newly promoted team, especially one who hasn't been in the Premier League for so long, it was over 70 years when we got promoted, it helps to get that first win under your belt. You see teams nowadays, I think Ipswich took so long to get their first win at home. I feel like it would get on your mind. If we didn't win that opening game, then there's always a question mark, when is the first win come in? And, it's easy to lose games in the Premier League. It's very easy. And I think we've seen since we've come up how much, especially last season and this season, how much a promoted three struggles. So I don't think it can be underestimated how well we've done. And obviously Palace as well. I know you got promoted many years ago now, but you're always a team that seems to be solid enough in the Premier League. I suspect the only frustration from Palace fans' point of view is that you haven't really pushed on beyond being solid enough in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think we've been in the Prem now for about a decade, but we got relegated the previous time we were there, and got relegated on the last day of the season when it statistically wasn't supposed to happen, which is always fun. So, but yeah, ours is very much we've been slowly plugging away and never really pushing any further. We like our little comfort zone of mid-table, but we've had some decent runs and decent sort of teams out over the years that have never pushed any further. But going back to sort of Brentford, I think a lot of that comes down to the recruiting style you kind of have. You're not going out to get world beaters or anything. You're getting players that fit a system at a decent price. So it's not sort of very much in the same vein as Palace of trying to keep it as sustainable as possible. So which I really do, I kind of admire that kind of thing. The same way with Brighton do the same kind of style of get players to fit a system. Would you kind of agree with that, or would you want them to be doing a little bit more in the transfer window?
I mean, I guess everyone's going to want a little bit more, but that's not how football and finances work, especially Brentford. I mean, we don't have the richest owner. He's probably near the bottom of the list in terms of Premier League owners. Of course, it helps that we're in the Premier League and we get the money that's associated with that. I think we've ever since promotion, we've not broken the bank. I mean, even now, the core of our team, when everyone's fit, the likes of Norgard, Yanel, Pinnock and Bumo, all in the Championship squad that got promoted. I think it's harder in the Premier League to recruit players. Brentford don't typically sign Premier League proven players because they come as an expense. They're just typically more expensive. So we do tend to sign players who could grow into the role, and as a result, it sometimes takes time for new signings to bed in. For example, Damsgaard this season has been our best player, but it took him a year or two to get where he is now. I'd say the same about Nathan Collins at centre-back, and again, Keane Lewis-Potter as well, who's playing really well at the moment. He's playing really well at left-back, which he's not. He's always been an attacking player, but he's done so well at left-back this season that I'm wondering if actually that is where his future lies. But yeah, the recruitment's been good, largely. It does take time for these players to bed in. Johan Wisser, another one. We signed one of our first Premier League signings. He's always good for goals, and he's worth a lot more now than what we bought him for. Over the years, of course, we've lost one or two. We lost David Raya a couple of years ago. We lost Ivan Toney. Obviously, the summer just gone, and I probably expect Brian and Bumo, someone like him, to be next. So we're very much used to that model. We tend to sign for fairly low fees and sell for a lot more. Of course, we are breaking our transfer records seemingly every year now, as we become more established and we do have more funds. But yeah, it's generally been good. We're still waiting for certain players to come good. Kevin Shard has been a bit hit and miss, but you can see the potential there. And in a year or two's time, we could be saying how he's the next big star that goes for a big fee. Dortmund are already looking at him, despite him not really achieving his potential with us yet. And then the likes of Igor Thiago, who he signed in the summer to replace Ivan Toney, we've barely seen yet because he's been injured nearly all season, which isn't ideal. And it is something, if I'm going to criticise us at all, we are a team that suffer a lot of injuries, and we do seem to sign a lot of players who are quite injury prone, if I am going to criticise us at all. But yeah, generally it's been good. Obviously, we've got another player coming in, hopefully in the next day or two, which fills a void at fullback, given that Aaron Hickey and Rico Henry have recently been out for so long. I think we do need more depth there, so hopefully that will help as well.
Yeah, I think Palace are kind of very much in the same vein when it comes to recruiting. Go through the Championship, go through some of the mid-table sort of foreign leagues, the German or the sort of the Spanish, whatever. Actually, we've got in sort of Kamada for a relatively sort of modest price. Hasn't quite found his feet yet. He's had one or two sort of decent games, but he's never actually shown what he could potentially do. We got Lacroix in, who also took a couple of games to get into it, but is now becoming a very firm fan favourite, especially with his way of celebrating with the fans after every game. Sort of go over to the fan block, either the away or whatever, and actually sort of celebrating with them and getting them all right, sort of getting the fans going. But we've also had our duds with Nketiah for a fairly sizable fee. Hasn't really delivered yet, but we all know what he should be able to do. But for whatever reason in the Palace setup, it is not working. But very much in the same vein of trying to get players on a decent price and probably going more into the Championship, getting players that can actually grow into a role more than just sort of forcing them into a team that's not really ready for them. Is there anything else you want to ask before we move on?
No, I'm happy to go straight ahead with predictions, if that's next.
Go into predictions, couple of yes. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll go into some predictions for scores and maybe a couple of players from both sides that will have an impact in the game of the battle for the mid-table.
The Global Sports Podcast Network is changing the face of football podcasts. With dedicated daily content for every Premier League team, women's football, fantasy football, and a daily Premier League wrap-up broadcast in 5 different languages, it's your one-stop shop for your daily football fix. Find GSPN wherever you find your usual podcast.
And we are back with the Daily Palace podcast with a crossover with Brentford. We're now going to go into the final section. The most important part of the preview ones and the crossovers are the score predictions and which players do we think are going to have an impact in the game. So, Dan, as you are the guest, what do you think? What's your score predictions and who do you think the key players are probably going to be?
I think it'll be a really tight game. I think it wouldn't surprise me if it goes either way. I think we're still in the early stages of our away form improving. I've been asked so many times this season why our away form has been so bad compared to our home form. I think a lot of it is due to just the fixtures we played. We've played a lot of the bottom 6 or 7 at home and not away yet. And I think I was kind of proven right, considering our last away game was Southampton and we won 5-0. So we can play well away. I think it just obviously depends on the opposition a lot of the time. I think home advantage is a thing. I expect our home record to be slightly better than our away record, but I certainly don't think we can't get results away from home. I think this will be tight. I think this could go back to before our last 2 games against each other where we used to just keep drawing and there used to be not too much in the game. So I'll go 1-1. I always think we'll concede because we're quite leaky at the back. We haven't kept many clean sheets this season, but equally you could say going forward the likes of Damsgaard and Boomer and Wissa, those three in particular, they can hurt anybody on their day. As I said, I think Damsgaard's been our best player this season. Everything good that we do it goes through him. He is always positive, always looking to go forwards. And then when you've got the likes of Mbuma and Wissa who will make the runs and they will finish it off, we always pose a threat, I think, in that way. I think if we struggle with anything, it's sometimes getting the ball out. We don't have a big target man up front. Well, Igor Thiago would be that, but he's been injured for most of the season. Kevin Schade, he's got a leap on him. He's quite tall, so we can go longer through him at times. I think especially against the bigger teams, we struggled sometimes to get out of our own area. But I'm hopeful here that we can have some play. We will be able to play some football, and hopefully between those three in particular, we'll be able to create things. So I'll go 1-1. I think it will be tight. I think both teams will have chances, and yeah, I think it will be more of the same if we ignore the last couple of results between Brentford and Palace.
We're just trying to ignore them, yeah. And it's like, yeah, you beat Southampton. Well, that's not exactly fair, really, is it? That's just bullying them after a while.
It's proof that we can play away from home, and we hadn't run away until then.
But yeah, I say this every time when it's a Palace game. It's going to be, it's not going to be that pretty. It's going to be a fight for every blade of grass. We're not, I wouldn't say classy, but we have a really kind of deadly counter attack, especially with Eze and Mateta kind of growing this chemistry over the last few games. I think 2 or 3 of the last Mateta goals have been from Eze assist, especially one against West Ham the other day and against Ipswich. But it's also the thing about our home form isn't particularly brilliant. We're kind of hit and miss when it comes to at home, but we can play against the big guys there. But when it's the teams that we should be winning, we tend to kind of struggle a bit. But other than the usual as Mateta and Eze, I think Munez might be quite effective now that he's sort of back from his mini suspension over Christmas. He's starting to be a little bit more effective down that right wing with his sort of speed and his pace. Hopefully, we might even get a debut from Roman Essi as well, so we could add that into the equation of the next Alesi, who's essentially been dubbed. So we could the Premiership can finally see if he's actually worth what everybody was saying about him. Is there anybody on the Palace side you're kind of don't really want to have a good game that you're kind of worried about?
Well, it would be Eze and Mateta. I think that's where the goals come from. I think the creativity
after the West Ham game,
yeah, the creativity comes through Eze. Obviously, Mateta goes on these runs of form where he's on a real hot streak, and I think he's approaching one now if he's not on one. So I think that's a danger that we need to stop. I think he's obviously quite a physical striker as well. He'll get in our faces, and I've heard you also play that song when he scores, so I don't want to be hearing that.
Oh yeah, you don't want to hear the Wenger boys go off, do you? Yeah, well, I'm kind of worried about Matomo, really. He's the fantasy football darling at the moment. He is scoring so many sort of weird and wonderful goals, so he's one I'm kind of concerned about. And Darmstadt is definitely a guy I've kind of admire for a while. I definitely would like him at Palace. I think I did something we were talking about him a couple of weeks ago, and definitely one of those guys that's sort of really deadly set piece taker, really, really good playmaking midfielder. And when he's on, he can be really hard to defend against. And I think our central midfield isn't the best at the moment. We're doing all right. It started off pretty light and pretty sort of uninspired, but Hughes has started to get somewhere, especially after the Brentford game, which I think on this podcast we definitely rinsed him for quite a while because of that stupid little mistake, and we're wondering why he's still at the club. But now he's now coming into a bit of form. So yeah, I think we're going to have it's going to be a probably unspectacular game. I don't think I've done a score prediction yet. I think my prediction will probably be 1-0 Palace. We're starting to do a little bit better in defence, but we are not big goal scorers. It's very much a 1-0 and then shut up shop as much as possible. Or this could descend into a 2-2 back and forth game. So that's kind of the problem with these mid-table teams when they're too similar to each other. At the very least, whoever can get some points out of it can move further away from Man United and Spurs and slowly push them down in the relegation zone. Is there anything else you want to bring up, Dan, before we
No, it sounds
finish
like a good place to wrap up on that note.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. That both of our teams will want to push Spurs and Man United close to the relegation zone. Well, on that, I want to thank Daniel from the Daily Brentford for taking the time out of his obviously busy day to come and have a chat with me about the weekend fixture. And I think we'll call it there. So if you want to give us a 5-star, it helps us get noticed. We're on Spotify, on Apple. We've got an Instagram. You can even go and watch us on YouTube and go and see our put the faces to the voices that you can hear. And until next time, goodbye.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.